Good evening, class. We are continuing our lessons with regard to the United States Constitution as well as the separation of powers. With regard to the United States Constitution and separation of powers, we are looking at a federal system. The United States, of course, is considered a federal system in which the federal government has a nation that is ruled by a central government under which there are smaller aspects or subdivisions of the government. It's a two-tiered system of government. So you have your federal government, and then underneath of that you have your state governments, which come along with their own separation of powers with regard to the federal government as well as the state government. The federal government is divided into three branches, which is the judicial, the executive, and the legislative, also known as Congress. The legislative branch consists of the House of Representatives and then the Senate. The three branches have a built-in system of checks and balances that assures that no single branch asserts too much power. Also, if you look at the federal system as a whole, where you have the divisions between the federal government and the state governments, that also assures that the federal government, for lack of a better term, doesn't bully the state governments, or the state governments don't try to usurp the federal government. So you have separation of powers with regard to many different levels with regard to the Constitution. Going back to it, the powers that are within the Constitution, they dictate what the federal government as well as what the state government have as defined powers within the United States Constitution. Also, the United States Constitution delineates powers between the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branches as well, so that their powers are actually what we refer to as outlined in the United States Constitution. According to the Constitution, powers that are not granted to the federal government are automatically reserved for the state governments. Federal systems of government, they work well for larger governments that have, again, the need for a central government to maintain control, peace, trade, treaties, things of that nature. And then with regard to giving them a system of local government that can more so focus on the areas that are important to them on a local level, such as state government as well as municipality government and city government, if you want to drill it down as that far. Going back to our lesson about the separation of powers with regard to the three branches of the United States Constitution that we discussed yesterday, you have on your desk, you have been given just a flag to color, the United States flag to color, and this will serve as your cover sheet. I have also given you separate pieces of paper that are within your Ziploc baggies that are located on your desks, as well as a blank sheet that at the top has the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches. Now you're going to take your cutouts and glue them to the different sections under here, to the different branches, so that then you come up with a study guide with a graphic organizer that has a cover on it that is the flag, and then you can optionally choose to color that if you want to make it prettier and liven it up. And then when you flip it over, then you will have a study guide that will tell you the powers of the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch once you are all done. This is the completed one that I have. Yours, like I said, are divvied in the baggies, and then you will glue them to there. And then we will go over these as soon as you finish your assignment. We will go over to make sure that everyone has the exact correct answers underneath each branch of government. Also, do you remember the Venn diagram that I passed out to you yesterday, the blank Venn diagram with regard to the federal system of the United States government? On here you have the powers that have been given to the national government. You have the powers that have been given to the state government, and in the middle is where you will put the overlapping powers between the national and the state governments. I will give you a hint for one of these in the middle. Your parents pay them by April 14th every year to both the federal government as well as the state government. They have to fill out, depending on statuses and different things, either a 1040 and then there's a state form as well. So that's a little hint of one of those shared powers that's in between there to go with your Venn diagram. This is actually a copy, which I will not pass around yet because we're going to go over it, of the completed Venn diagram that we're actually going to go over once you finish your Venn diagram with regard to the delegated powers of the state and the federal governments. This will also serve as your study guide for the upcoming quiz with regard to the federal system in the overall arching lesson of the separation of powers, not only within the 3 branches of the federal government, you can also drill that down to the state governments as well, but then also with regard to the federal system. With regard to the Venn diagram, Venn diagrams were actually discussed by Laura Robb, and there was an example of a Venn diagram on page 176 in a graduate textbook that I was provided when I was studying to become a teacher in the education profession. But on 176 is an example of a Venn diagram. With regard to your graphic organizers for the flag and your separation of powers with regard to the branches of government, legislative, judicial, and executive. This is a visualizing strategy that will help you to have a key and a visual aid that you can remember for what are some of the aspects of the legislative branch, for instance. And I'm going to give you one of the answers by telling you this, but once you complete your assignment, then you will have under here that the legislative branch has 534 members. And that you will understand that and remember and be able to visualize by completing this chart that the judicial branch Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. I'm just giving you 2 answers, actually. I know you're so excited over there in the corner. Bill. Well, let's get started. As I said, you have your separation of branches and the powers with the branches and different facts about the branches. The cutouts are in your Ziploc baggies that are on your desk. So if you will please start with that, and then we will go over and make sure that everyone has the correct information for legislative, executive, and judicial branch, and then we move on to your Venn diagram. Thank you.